First off, I want to say thank you everybody for attending tonight. Really appreciate it. It's great to meet you. My name is Mike Brunchin. I'm Director of Sales for TriNet here in the Pacific Northwest. So I have a team in the Seattle market, team down in Portland, but often come up here and love to host these types of events, meet all of you all. So it's been a pleasure. If I haven't met you yet, looking forward to doing so later this evening. Wanted to get it kicked off by doing a few introductions. If you got the invitation, you probably have a little bit of insight into who our panelists are tonight, but we'll go a little bit deeper here with you all. So first off, we have Kelly Lawton Abbott. She's an attorney with Smith Shaporian.
You can call us SSM.
SSM Law. Thank you very much. It's a mouthful. So it's a woman and minority-owned law firm here in the San Francisco, San Diego, Seattle, and Oakland area. Kelly specifically spearheads the Seattle office, represents clients in the tech industry and industry-adjacent services providers. She works with clients on formations, corporate governance, and compliance, note and venture financing, employment, commercial, and tech transactions, intellectual property, and privacy compliance. Kelly works with various clients from solo entrepreneurs to Fortune 500 companies. So if you wouldn't mind, give her a round of applause for offering this up. Next, we have Mr. Owen Carden. He is a venture capital, and he's done venture capital in Silicon Valley, rather, 3 different times. He also has helped raise capital from LPs, in excess of $1 billion in his tenure. CEO of 3 different tech companies as well. IPOs and NASDAQ 2 different times. M&A 1 time. Microsoft product manager for 10 years. Software and hardware. And he's also an advisor and consultant. Just a wealth of knowledge. So welcome and thank you for being here. Next, we have Bob Wallach. He is with Alliance of Angels. He's a board member. It's a local angel investor here in the Seattle area. The first phase of Bob's career was at large consumer product company, including Kraft, Canon, Nabisco, and Continental Mills in senior executive roles, where his responsibilities encompass marketing, sales, strategic planning, and M&A. The second phase of his career was as an entrepreneur CEO, where he conceived and ran a successful internet venture. Now in the third phase of his career, Bob is an active angel investor. He also serves on the board of directors of Alliance of Angels, the largest angel group in the Northwest, Melt Organic, Lopez Foods, and Sunflower. Bob has received numerous awards for accelerating business growth, including recognition by Advertising Age as one of the top 100 marketers in America. Bob, welcome. Thank you for being part of this. Last but not least, we have Kevin Gunter. He is with Alterna Capital Solutions, Executive Vice President. As a co-founder at Alterna Capital Solutions, Kevin leads new business organizations and operations for the West region of the United States. Alterna Capital Solutions provides flexible growth and capital solutions through accounts receivable financing, AR, and asset-based lending when traditional financing isn't available or sufficient. So commitments and credit facilities of $500,000 to $50 million, collateral, accounts receivables, and inventory. So again, welcome Kevin Gunter. Pleasure to have you. And last but not least, our moderator for the evening is Kalina with FRB, traveling up from California. So it's a pleasure to have you as well.
Thank you very much.
And I'll let you take it from here.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. I'm Kalina Thompson with First Republic Bank. I am a senior private banker there working in the technology VC PE space. So without further ado, I wanted to just kind of get this conversation started. I know that you guys are all very interested and excited about this topic. And it is very near and dear to me, even though I don't have a startup. So we kind of want to get started with in terms of, just the state of investments. How does the landscape look like for 2023? So I just wanted to kick it off to Kelly and see what are you seeing in the market?
So I wanted to start to set the stage of looking at 2021, 2022. 2021 was a boom year for startups receiving venture capital investment. There started to be some strains in the market as we moved into 2022, and it's expected to continue through this year. So thinking kind of from the early stages of a startup, at the pre-seed, seed stage, for these companies, they're typically receiving investments through friends and family rounds, angel investors, and then moving on to venture capital investors. And so what we saw kind of the market stats have been that the pre-seed, those early stage rounds are raising about 500,000. Then moving into the seed round, the stats for last year, the median seed round was actually at 3.3 million. And historically, that is much higher than it has been. It's up 20% quarter over quarter, and 27% year over year. And so this was the record amount for money raised for seed stage companies, even though the actual number of deals slightly fell. These raises are typically through SAFEs, which is a simple agreement for future equity. And so convertible notes used to be more common here. I'll get into the details of those a little bit later, and I know Bob will be speaking on that as well. But what we're actually seeing is typically, previously, companies, if they were raising around 10 million, they would change that into a priced round where investors are purchasing shares for dollars. But we're actually seeing startups raising up to 10 million through SAFEs and convertible notes. And I'll talk a little bit more about kind of some of the reasons on that later. But I think what we can really take from all of this is that the angel and seed rounds are not as affected by the recession as starting from Series A on. Some of you, I think there was some traction on an article that GeekWire put out either this week, last week, showing that investments were down 80% this year. And while that number is staggering, that's looking at the market as a whole and not kind of breaking it down by stages. So I think it's really important to look at this. Most important note, it's a market correction. And so I think kind of overall, there has been a decrease in the amount raised as we start getting into the Series A. That median deal size used to be about 10 million. Now it's gone down to 9.6. I was listening to a podcast recently, Mark Goldberg, who's a partner and fintech lead at Index Ventures. He shared this analogy comparing the current market to video games, and he said if investing was a video game, it's gone from easy mode to expert mode in about 6 months. And because of this, it has really prompted this discussion on what are the alternative ways to venture capital financing to raise capital. And so that kind of what brings us here today.
Oh, thank you for that, Kelly. And we're gonna ask Kevin here. Sorry about that. Kevin, what are you seeing in the debt market in terms of the landscape? What has changed in the last year relative to this year?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Speaking purely from a debt capital perspective, my firm works closely with traditional banks, both large and small. So we get to see firsthand how the banks are reacting to the overall economic environment. And what we're seeing now, certainly over the last 6 to 9 months, and looking forward, we certainly expect that it's going to continue, just given the general uncertainty and instability in the overall economic environment, rising interest rate environment. There is some tightening in the traditional banking world, tightening of credit policy, tightening of credit risk appetite, which of course, again, from a debt capital perspective, will certainly make it more challenging for business owners to obtain adequate and sufficient growth capital to support their growth needs. We recently, in December 2022, there was an organization called Biz to Credit. They're a small business lender in the marketplace. They did a survey, and the results of that survey showed that over the last 2 years, big banks, those with 50 billion of assets and greater, small banks, those with less than 50 billion in assets, and credit unions who lend to businesses, all have seen a decline in their approval rates by more than 50% over the last 2 years. Compare that to the non-bank alternative lending community. They have seen an increase in their approval rates over the same period of more than 25%. So again, it just kind of speaks further to the overall tightening in the credit market, credit risk appetite of the traditional lenders.
Thank you. Owen, with your exposure and background, what are you seeing in terms of the landscape?
Okay. What I'm seeing in terms of the landscape is, well, I want to know, I didn't talk to all of you, so I want to know who's seed and who's Series A and who's Series B. By show of hands, could you tell me who's seed? Okay. Mostly here. Oh, you as well. Series A? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Series B? Okay, we won't talk about C and D. So PE companies, I'm going to talk about in general what the landscape is. PE companies tend to put in 50 million, and it's succession plans. If somebody hasn't got a succession plan in place, you can sell the company. That's after you've funded it. So venture capital, I'll say institutional venture capital, is basically 2.5 to 10 million. My colleague here, Kelly, was right when she said 9.6, I think. Institutional venture capital can be swapped with venture capital. Those are primarily equity-based companies or equity-based opportunities. So family offices, single and multiple. Do you know that there's 3,000 single family offices here in the USA, but there's only 150 multiple, 150, not 150,000, 150 multiple family offices here in the USA. So you can capitalize your company from single family offices, 3,000 of these guys. There's 6,000 venture companies, institutional venture companies. So at one end of the scale, we've got all of these guys on equity. On the other end of the scale, we've got my colleague here, angels. And we've got friends and family. So all of these people look for equity, except for debt. My colleague at the end here is looking for debt. Debt is not equity, and debt is rising really quickly. So we're going to talk about debt in a moment, but that's what I'm seeing in terms of equity and debt. Let's see. Don't focus on valuations. Don't focus on valuations. If you're raising money, raise the capital. Don't focus on the valuation. It's not important. If you need to do it now, don't focus on the valuation. Take a hit on the valuation. I raised capital from LPs for venture capital. These people are employees. Institutional venture capital are employees. Family offices you're going to talk to are employees. Angels are not employees. Angels and friends and family are paying out of their own checking account. So it's as hard to get to 500K as it is to get to 5 million. If you talk to an institutional venture capital, capitalist, they're employees. So that's what I'm seeing at the moment.
Thank you, Owen. Well, that leads us to Bob. Bob, what is it that you're currently seeing as an angel investor? And since Owen kind of touched upon it, you know, what are your thoughts on valuations?
Sure. Well, we all have a different angle or a different lens, so you may even find us disagreeing, and that's okay. That's worth hearing. I feel that we're returning to normal. The backroom chatter among angel investors over the past few years is these valuations are ridiculous, and the reason for it is people had some great gains. You know, these are individuals who either invest alone or invest as part of a group, but they had money and they wanted to put that money to work. And this asset class became very attractive because the other asset classes were less attractive, and the interest rates, as you know, were terrible. So there was money. So the supply-demand relationship shifted a little bit. You could get a deal could get hot pretty quick, especially if it had the right team and the right market, and all the things we'll talk more about later. So as a result, valuations were going up, driven by our good friends in California, who tend to drive things out of Silicon Valley, and it was ridiculous. Pre-money companies asking for $10 million valuations or whatever. Now, I would say most entrepreneurs that I talk to think about valuations selfishly. How am I going to get diluted? What share of ownership will I have? That's their main concern. And I would argue if you really want to be successful in raising funds, you need to turn that lens around and look at it from an investor perspective. And there's something called a waterfall chart. If you don't know what that is, Google it and learn about it. Because that is how an investor decides what return on investment they're going to get. And they plug in your valuation, they plug in all your rounds that you're going to get, and they plug in estimates of multiples and exit timing. And that tells them, is this going to give me a 10x return on my money or not? You need to be aware when you pitch somebody what their model is going to look like. You know, and by the way, it's a way for you to defend the valuation you're arguing for, if you can prove it. But if you just go in there and pick a number out of the air, which I've seen so many people do, the other thing is you need to know what's happening in the market you're raising funds in. A valuation for a company at a certain stage of its growth is different in Seattle than Silicon Valley, than New York, than Chicago, than Boise, Idaho. So you need to be able to talk to people who know that information before you get in front of them, because you don't want to embarrass yourself and you want to be able to defend yourself. That said, valuations are coming down, not as fast as we would like, and a lot of angel investors have been sitting on the sidelines, at least in the groups that I'm involved in here, waiting for the valuations to normalize. Now, a hot deal at a high valuation is still getting funded, and we're still funding deals. And there's a lot of money still sloshing around, but there's more money on the sidelines than there used to be. And I think that's going to change this year as we start to see entrepreneurs banging up against and negotiating with angels or angel groups about the valuation. Realistic, and once you get a credible organization like Alliance of Angels or others to buy into your valuation, that brings credibility. Others will usually accept your valuation if someone they believe in the market is credible has accepted it. So, having a marquee investor early in your process is a great way to accelerate things. I think we're going to see a lot more challenge related to just getting funded because all these tech companies are now laying people off in this market. So there's going to be a ton of people who say, hey, now that I'm on the street, I'll go do the idea I've always dreamed about. So there's going to be a crowd coming here in 6 to 9 months of the people who are right now working in the garages on those ideas. So be aware. I get out now. I get ahead of it if I could, if you're in tech. If you're not in tech, it's probably not going to change quite as much. Some thoughts. Very good.
Now that we kind of touched about the fact that raising money is a good time, Owen, what are your thoughts in terms of how should somebody think about in terms of raising money? Is there differences between investors? What's the best way of selecting capital or through the different iterations?
Okay. My colleague here talked about not looking at valuations. You don't have to look at valuation. Look at the amount of equity you're giving up. So at a seed round, you're going to give up a lot more equity than at a Series A and a Series B. But you plug in how much equity you're going to give up, and that's how much you're going to give up. Don't worry about the valuation, okay? you need to get to cash flow quickly. So competing term sheets is interesting. When you have multiple term sheets, you can play one off against another. By that I mean multiple investors from family offices or angels or institutions. When they're providing capital to you, you get a term sheet. And the term sheet, multiple term sheets, you want that. You want that. That's called competing term sheets. One of the things we look for is, has the investor then in your previous round wanted to put up money in the current round? It's a red flag if they're not. So when you're talking about seed capital, friends and family, it doesn't matter how much they put up. It's important that they put up something. So when you say you want a seed investor or a Series A investor, you need to look at the other rounds prior to and focus on them. Because if I'm Irish. If you can't tell, that's my accent. I was born in Ireland. I went through England. I came to America. I was with Microsoft as a product manager. So I took a couple of companies public, Timeline and iManage. I thought that was how you made money. I didn't realize you made money from M&As and exiting companies. I thought you had to IPO a company. So I've done that. Now I'm trying to explain to other people how to navigate this issue and how to navigate capital raises. So it's important that you get to capital. When you have an investor that's put into your earlier round, it's night and day if they're going to put into your follow-on round. If they're not going to put, this is the first question you'll get from an investor will be, how many people have put in that are going to re-up? And that's the main issue.
So in terms of, getting access to capital, obviously fundraising is one form. Another form would be considering debt facilities. Kevin, what are some of the things that startup companies should consider when looking into debt facilities?
Yeah, so I think it's important to recognize and understand that there's different types of debt capital financing vehicles that are available depending on where you are in your life cycle. For the startups, just kind of breaking it into startups and mature companies. For startups, there's pre-revenue, companies that are looking for capital that are pre-revenue. They're still in development stage, et cetera. And then there's pre-profit, companies that are in the startup stage of their life cycle. They're generating revenue, they have customers, but they're not yet profitable. The types of financing that will be available to those two types of startups are different. Venture capital firms a lot of times will invest for an equity stake in the business, but many VC firms have a financing arm as well. Well, they will provide debt capital to early stage startup pre-revenue companies. For the pre-profit startups, the net, it gets cast a little wider. Now you're looking at potentially SBA type of financing. SBDCs in different communities have lending groups who provide small kind of micro loans to startup companies. Non-bank lenders provide various types of startup capital for whether it be accounts receivable financing, purchase order, equipment. So just kind of understanding where you are in your life cycle and the stage you're at. will determine the direction that you can take when it comes to debt. And then, aside from startups, talking about mature companies, the net is cast even wider, right? Then you're looking at large banks, small banks. There's a myriad of different vehicles that are available. Something we saw a lot of over the last couple of years through the pandemic was of course the PPP, which became, if you met certain criteria, those loans became grants. The SBA put out an economic injury disaster loan program known as EIDL. Those were very popular and continue to be. The SBA has made some changes and increased the amounts of those, although it's starting to sunset. I think the other thing that's important when thinking about debt is being realistic, understanding where we are today from an interest rate, from a cost of capital standpoint. Again, debt financing, you're not giving up ownership, you're not diluting, you're paying interest. Where we are today as compared to where we were a year ago even, is pretty different. I mean, we are, as I mentioned earlier, we're in a rising rate environment. The Fed has increased rates, what, 5 times,
Yeah.
4.75% Fed funds rate has gone up. So be realistic, educate yourself on, the going rate, so to speak, for the different types of vehicles that we're looking at.
Definitely different options, short-term debt, long-term debt, all should be considered. And when we're looking at raising funds, Kelly, what else should a founder consider on the legal side?
So some of the basics have already been talked about from the other panelists. If you are taking on investments and giving up equity, you are giving away a percentage of your company. If you're taking on debt, let's say through a convertible note or through other avenues, then you are making a promise to pay that money back. And so early stage companies, some of you may kind of in this phase may be familiar with this already, but raising through safes and convertible notes. I kind of wanted to talk through some of the terms that are important as kind of the basic structure for these. So as I mentioned, a safe is a simple agreement for future equity. So you're promising that investor participation in a future round at a discount. So it will automatically convert when you are in that round. There is no maturity date, so it can take you 6 months, a year. There isn't a deadline on that to happen. There's not going to be accruing interest because it's not a debt instrument. And then there's going to be conversion terms, which are going to include a valuation cap and or discount, which is going to be calculated to determine what the price of those shares are. On the other side, we have convertible notes, which are debt. There's going to be a maturity date for the conversion. So at that maturity date, you are either going to be required to pay back that loan or it's going to convert into equity. Because it's debt, it's going to include accrued interest on that. And then again, it's going to include the conversion terms, which are going to be included there. One thing I think that's interesting to see in the change in the amount of raises, as I mentioned, that companies are raising up to 10 million through safes, is that it seems that this is happening more in the market, one, because there are a lot more DIY ways to do raises through safes, through platforms like Carta. This may or may not be a good thing for you. It's going to be case dependent, but big thing here, you raise through a lot of safes. One, you're going to have dilution, and two, you're going to have to manage those safes. So just because someone wants to give you money for your company, there should be a cost-benefit analysis that you're working with your CPA, you're working with your advisors to make sure that that is actually the best choice for your company. And another thing too is if you are doing a round through a safe, it's going to be a lot cheaper than if you do a priced round, which can easily cost from $30,000 up. But again, you want to be aware of how that's going to impact your company in the long term, not just the today. Yeah.
And kind of rounding back out into the whole fundraising, Bob, what are your thoughts in terms of a founder? Is there anything that they need to consider or think differently when it comes to fundraising in this challenging market?
Yeah, I mean, the overarching answer is be better. you know, do your homework, take the time, you know, preparation matters even when you think you're there. There are certain things that are going to make you do better in a more challenging environment. You know, you've got a big problem you're solving, and you're solving it in a unique and compelling way. That's going to always attract interest. If you're part of a wave, you know, there's always waves and trends running through business. Right now, we had Bitcoin. Remember, if you did anything associated with Bitcoin for a period of time, people were throwing money at you. They didn't understand it, but they were just throwing money because they wanted to play. You know, a lot of us regret that, but that's the way these things work, right? You know, right now the wave is AI. So you walk in tomorrow to my group and you say, I've got an AI program, and the ears perk up because they're interested, okay? You're getting more than your fair share of attention, to be honest. So if you happen to be there, play that card hard. Tighten your plans, tighten your pitch, customize it to the audience. I see this a lot. People put together a deck. They don't think about, okay, I've got a tech solution. Is my audience technologically savvy? Or am I presenting to a bunch of people that I have to explain things? You know, I see people using acronyms in presentations to a broad audience. So don't make those. Those are sort of rookie mistakes you shouldn't make. And you got to kind of understand the audience. If you have a sponsor, which I recommend when you're going to angel groups, they can coach you on that. And I think that's the most important thing. You want to take the attitude that even though you think it's beautiful, your baby is fundamentally ugly. Let's find out why. So you want to network like crazy to talk to people who are knowledgeable, who represent your audience, and say, tell me what's wrong or right about what I'm doing, how can I be better? If you haven't done 50 versions of your pitch deck, you probably haven't worked hard enough at it. Broadway shows don't start on Broadway, right? And even when you start pitching, don't pitch to your most important investors first. Go to some of the little guys. Go on the road, right? Like they do with the Broadway shows. You know, go present in Portland somewhere before you come to the big investor. Not to knock those towns. They have great groups. You know what I'm saying. What you'll find is people are generous. Most of the people I know who do angel investing do it in part to make money, but more importantly, they like to help. And so I get calls. I do office hours. We do a thing in Alliance of Angels. We have office hours. Any of you can call up Alliance of Angels. You don't have to have any relationship with us. I'd like to come to office hours, and you'll get somebody like me who will sit on the phone with you for an hour. You can ask them whatever you want. You can go through your pitch deck. You can say, I don't understand valuation. Explain all these topics we're talking about. It's absolutely free. Take advantage of it. And then at the end, say, do you know anybody else I can talk to? Find 3 people. And, you know, the normal thing. But get as many people beating on your plan and telling you where you're weak. It'll benefit you in the long run.
So I'm gonna stay with you, Bob, and ask for your advice. How should somebody, a founder, think about what should they consider when picking an investor?
Well, you want to have you got to map out a campaign, and there's phases in it. There's the preparation phase, and we talked about pitch decks, but you want to get your whole deal room organized in advance. That's one of the things when an investor gets involved and they're interested in your company, and you say, oh, now I got to go find all these documents and information. That's a bad sign. That says you're not prepared. So I encourage you to understand what's supposed to be in the deal room and have it pre-populated. It also is good for your life because you can say, and if you populate it in a way that an investor thinks about it. So you say, I know they're going to want to ask me about market. I've got a file in here that talks about the market. I've got a file that talks about competition, technology, IP, regulatory. Take all the topics and say, I built all that detail in there. I've also got a running FAQ so that when they're not constantly bugging you, because you're going to be talking to 1 million people, you got to run a business too. So the more you pre-populate that intelligently and get feedback on it where you can, the less time and effort you're going to have to put into this process. The more you can say, just go to our deal room, or here's where you look, or I'm happy to spend time, but look at this document first. So prepare your pitch, prepare your deal room. And then I would say you're mapping out your strategy, who you're going to go talk to, your target. It's a marketing challenge. So the first thing you have to say is, who's historically invested in my sector? Who would be interested in this? Because there's individuals and groups and family offices. Some are interested, some are not. Some are open to a lot. Some are really focused on your area. The more you can find groups that are really focused on your area, probably the more they're going to appreciate what you're doing, because more people in the room get it. If it's a technology play and we're a technology group, they'll get it. There used to be a med tech group in town called Wings. If you had med tech, you could walk in and you could shorthand a lot of the stuff that you'd have to explain in detail to the people, because they got it and they recognize opportunity. So, look for people who've historically invested in your space. Geography is sometimes important, so you definitely want to saturate the market you're in, but then look outside of the geography, particularly for groups that invest in your sector. So I had a group that was doing infrastructure that was based here in Seattle, which is not a great market for infrastructure investing. It's very capital intensive stuff, but they went down to Texas and found a group down there that was knowledgeable and had a good group. So think about who that is. Create an A, B, and C list of your priorities, and the last thing on that is kiss a lot of frogs. Don't even if you're doing well with somebody or a group, don't assume you're going to get the funding. It could fall apart anyway. So you want to have a lot. You want to create what's called FOMO, fear of missing out. You want momentum. If you can get a marquee investor in early, you'd be amazed. In the angel investing world, if you say, pick one, Dan Rosen was a super angel in town. Some of you may know. If Dan's in a deal, you lead with, by the way, Dan's in my deal. Would you like to learn more about it? And many people will say, well, Dan's in. I'll write the check. They will, it scares the hell out of Dan, by the way, because he doesn't mean that. But so if you can have either a marquee investor or a group that's recognized in town, that's the good housekeeping seal of approval. So that should be part of your strategy. Is how do I get the FOMO started? It's better to walk in. The best pitch is to say, we're almost closed. I'll make room for you guys, but I only have it's that kind of. If you get to that point, it's lovely. And then, by the way, the last thing I'll say on that is, regardless of how much you want to cap off your fundraising, if somebody offers you money, take it. Because you are going to underestimate the amount of funding you need. Every entrepreneur does it. I haven't met one that said, oh, I overestimated the money. It doesn't seem to happen. So don't be concerned if you say, I only thought I was going to get $1 million and I got $1.5 million.
And with Owen, just wanted to ask you, you mentioned competing term sheets earlier. What are some of the things that entrepreneurs should think about when it comes to competing term sheets, and what's the best way for them to go about picking an investor?
Okay. Really important is employees. Everyone is an employee at family office and institutional venture capital. They're all employees, so they get salaries to select you, and valuations. So valuation doesn't matter. Valuation is coming down to the stage it should be at. But institutional venture capital, they raise money as well. They use me to raise money. So limited partners put money to work in institutional venture capital and family offices. They have to, there's another thing. 5% of family offices, 5%, they have to put money to work. 5% of family offices have to put money to work to get taxes relief from the IRS. I didn't know that. Now you know that. So lots of people don't know 5% of Sergey Brin's fund. Sergey Brin founded Google. 5% is 60 billion, 10 million, 10 billion, be 3 billion. He has to put that to work every year. So I'm saying to you, once you're selected, go for it. Once you're selected from the fund or institution, go for it and get the capital in the door. Don't worry about the valuations. Let's see, notes. Oh, dumb money versus smart money. Don't focus on dumb money. Smart money is where it's at. Smart money is, well, I just want capital. No, you don't just want capital. Say you want 5 million, okay? The institutional venture capitalist will put in 5 million knowing that they have to follow on with 15 million. So they put in 5 million today. They know they're going to put in 15 million in future. So they can connect you with contacts. They can connect you with people that you need to talk to. So dumb money is the 5 million and you're out. Smart money is the 5 million and contacts or advice they've seen it all before. They've done it and seen it all before. Family offices and institutions and angels, they've all seen it before. We've seen it all before. So take that advice and counsel from people. Take that advice and counsel. Yeah.
So, and to your point, it's important to pick and choose the right investors. Bob, as an angel investor, do you have any advice to these founders in terms of how to pick or find the right angel investor?
Well, I think that it's always helpful if you're trying to, it's a networking game, and if you can get personally introduced to individual investors or family offices or angel groups, it's always helpful. When I hear that Jeff Entrust from Pioneer Square Labs, who's also a board member with AOA, recommended a certain group, my ears perk up because I respect that person. So if you can align yourself and meet some respected people, and it's really easy to, it's no skin off of Jeff's nose, as he said, well, you're not right for Pioneer Square Labs, but you seem interesting, I'll refer you over to the director at AOA. He's happy to do it, and yet it gives you a little bit of a leg up, so you want to try to get a personal reference to these folks in an introduction, and sometimes they'll give you some insight about how to best attack those opportunities. I agree on the concept of smart money, but you can only get so much, you can only take advantage of so much of it, so at the end of the day you need to raise the funds. There's a whole lot of dumb money out there, and those checks are worth something. But make sure you do have some people who can add value. So what I encourage folks to do, and by the way, are there any investors? Are there any company folks in the room that are raising funds that do not have a board? That do not have a board of directors? Okay. Think very seriously about creating a board of directors, because that's one of the knockout blows for most angel investors. They want to know that there's somebody overseeing the business that has accountability to the investors beyond the CEO, and that there's some board governance in place. And the selection of your board members can help you in fundraising. That's not the only reason you select them, but often you can select somebody to be on your board that can open doors for you. So leveraging your board, leveraging your accountants, your lawyers, all of your resources. It's just like job hunting. Talk to everybody, have your target list, say, here are some people or groups that I'm trying to connect with. You know anybody? You'll be surprised where the connections are that you didn't know were there. So you use those networking skills that you use for job hunting here the same way. Try not to, you got to have a short pitch. Don't overwhelm people with information when they're not interested. So you've got to have your elevator pitch and your one pager and your short pitch deck. You have to have a lot of different materials and make sure you're being sensitive to who the other person is and what they have time for and are interested in. So I think that's about all I can say now on what I've already said.
Thank you for that. And we're going to do a little bit of a transition here. Besides the traditional, raising of capital, debt financing as another form of capital, Bob, do you have any other recommendations in terms of potentially government grant that could help extend runway?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have some notes on that. There it is. Grants are wonderful. If you can get them, they're non-dilutive funding. They often come initially in a small bite, and then phase one kind of thing. We approve something out to the government, and then they say, "Oh, that's good. I'll give you more money." It's an arduous process. Let me give you a quick profile of the types of sort of non-dilutive money that may be available to you. You've got, you've probably heard of SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research Grants, STTR, which is Small Business Technology Transfer Grants. They come from organizations like the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Health, Department of Energy, the military. So there's a lot of federal money. So that's one area, and obviously you have to do something that aligns with the mission. I work with a company that is working on something that helps prevent skin cancer. We got one grant. We're in the process of getting a second one, and it has been fantastic for the company. Over $1 million worth of free funds. you have to set up your, let me continue down the list here first. There's the SBA grants, the SBA has grants and loans and they have different programs. There's Economic Development Administration at both the federal and the state level, and they have various programs. Department of Agriculture has programs if you're doing anything in ag tech. There's some interesting opportunities there. And state and local governments have programs. So you should at least know what's out there. It can be a little overwhelming. You got to do your research and you got to understand whether you would qualify. They are complicated things to do and they take a long time. And your responses. So this isn't something, if you need money now, a grant isn't probably a good thing for you to do. Then you want to talk to this guy. But if you have the time and you're doing things that are technical, that are, have R&D or technical things that because they tend to want you to fund that. There's some money for commercialization buried in there, but most of it is for innovation development. If you want to get ahead of it, I'd encourage you to think about hiring a grant writer to work with you, because there are nuances to writing grants that most of us have no idea. And I'm a pretty good writer, but I had no idea what I needed to do. They speak the language and they understand the tricks and traps. And are well worth the investment. There are good ones out there that you can find. You're going to need to change your accounting system, or at least adapt your accounting system, because they have requirements around how you account for the money you're getting. And so there's some administrative stuff you have to learn about. In my case, we hired a grant accountant separate from our regular accountant to reconstruct our books and manage the relationship with the granting organization. So I strongly encourage everybody to look into that. That's the first place to go if you can get money that way.
And since we're kind of talking about alternative forms of capital, all of these is basically based on the value of the company. Kelly, can you tell us a little bit more about what should founders consider or be proactive with when it comes to protecting their IP?
Yeah, so I think that's a great thing to keep in mind is if you're looking for investment from VCs, you're looking through debt investment, debt capital, that they are giving you money because you're building this company that has value. And sometimes those things are in tangible designs that you have, but a lot of times as software companies, it's in intangible items of things like your customer list, your processes. While you may have some of this documented, it's really kind of how you operate the company, but also kind of breaking down and knowing kind of the different buckets of intellectual property, knowing kind of what you're doing to protect them. So kind of just breaking it down. Trademarks is going to protect your name and your logo. Copyright is where it's protecting your software programs, graphic designs, business plans, chart, your website, your user interface, logos. But then you have trade secrets, which is this bucket of IP that's protecting things that don't fall under trademark, copyright, patents. But there's steps you need to take to protect that. And so patents, I think, is the one that a lot of people go to. One, they're very valuable when you can get them. They are also challenging to get. So my practice more focuses on trademark, copyright, trade secret. If you think you have a patentable invention, then you should talk with an IP attorney because it is very important that you go through the steps to know the IP you're building, how you're going to protect it, and then showing documentation for it. If you go through kind of receiving an investment through any of these methods we've been talking about, they're going to want to show documentation that the company owns it, that you have kind of done the due diligence to know that you can really build a company long term off of this. If it's something that you are unclear at and you're starting your company, highly recommend that you talk with an attorney who can talk with you about it in your particular circumstance and make sure you're doing the right things so you aren't giving up or getting yourself into situations that's going to cost you money that will then prevent you from really operating your business or being able to go out and raise.
And what are your thoughts with IP?
IP is intellectual property, is oxygen to investors. It's oxygen to partners. It's oxygen to your team. If you don't have IP, nobody wants to fund your company without IP. Nobody wants you to go out and educate the market, and they'll talk to others, and they have IP, other companies. So you block competitors with IP. You block everyone else from doing what you're doing with IP. And that's important. That's really important for investors, for partners, for teams. It's really important to have IP. Now there's two forms of IP. You can have utility patent pending or a method patent pending. It's better to have it pending than to have it issued. Why? Because you can't, competitors, you can't focus on the IP if it's not issued. You can't produce it if it's not issued. So you want to have it pending because that says you had it when it was preferably later or earlier is better. Later date is better. Pending, utility, and method is the patents. You want it pending, and to block others from focusing on this as well, and to block competitors from focusing on it.
And the final question for the evening is might be popular, might not be a popular question, but when should a founder consider an exit? Bob?
You should consider an exit the day you decide you want to start a startup. No, honestly, the first thing you have to ask is, do you want to be rich or do you want to be king? You may always want to run a business. I'm going to speak for, we were talking about this earlier, I want to speak for American businesses. It's okay to have a business that you don't exit, that you run, that you're proud of, that you spend your life doing. And if you really love what you're doing, and there are ways to get funded for that kind of business. We don't have the time to get into that, but if that's your interest, see me afterwards, because I can share that with you. Because I believe in that model too, even though we don't talk about it as much. But if you want to get funded, hopefully for an exit, you have to start by saying, do I have a business that I can exit someday? Because that's how an investor is going to look at it. And you need to understand in your sector, what's the current level of activity and maybe projected level of activity in the future for exits? Is it a sector like pharmaceuticals? It's highly acquisitive at an early stage. Or is it a sector like consumer products, which is late to the game? They want to see a lot of proof. They want you in market for 8 years and making $50 million before you can sell your company. So when is an exit appropriate? What are the signals that make you eligible for an exit? You want to know that up front. What are acquirers going to judge me by? Investment bankers will talk to you, or knowledgeable people in your industry will tell you. You need to have, they're going to be looking at sales, or they're going to be looking at profit, or they're going to be looking at number of customers or customer. There's different metrics. Whatever those exit metrics are, have to be on your dashboard. And I've even gone so far. One of the boards I sit on, we start every meeting by saying, what are we here for? We're here to build this company to $50 million, and we go over the other core metrics, and we want to do that in 5 years, and have an exit that's multiple. We literally say that to remind ourselves, we're not running a business, we're running an exit machine. The business is the vehicle to get us to the exit, as opposed to, and you would literally have a different set of metrics and goals if you were running the business long term. So understand that difference, embrace it early on, show investors that you understand it, and I think you'll do well.
And say if a company is headed towards IPO, Owen, when should a founder start planning that exit? I mean, the exit for the IPO.
I would echo what my colleague said to you, but investors are investing their capital for exits. That's why they're investing. They're investing for your exit. So when institutional venture capital, that's 8 years. 8 years minimum. It can be extended for a couple of years, but it's 8 years. So when you speak to an investor, talk about the exit strategy. I would say you need to plan the exit, or from the day you plan to start your company. The reason being, if you plan an IPO, I've done 2 IPOs. If you plan an IPO, your S1 is filed, right? S1 is filed. Those people your partners will buy you out 6 months you've got from the S1 to the IPO. So your partners can buy you out at that point. You can get an M&A, not go public. So that's a little secret. So you need to focus on your exit from the first capital raise. And I would be keen to see.
Since day one, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, and so Kelly, what are some of the market trends in terms of M&A or exits?
So for companies, I'm going to focus more on the M&A space. So companies that are looking to sell their company or go through a merger or consolidation, companies that aren't looking to go to exit through an IPO at that final stage. So as we're moving into 2023, there is a lot more talk in the market that there's going to be an increase in this activity because companies that were at those early stages, Series A kind of and beyond, aren't getting the raises that they want. So they're looking to other options. They're deciding it's not the kind of the path of bootstrapping or VC financing is not going to be what they were expecting. So they're looking at alternatives. And like the other panelists said, you want to look at it early so that you are set up in a way that is going to help kind of everyone succeed in that. It's important to know that M&A takes a long time. So if you are pursuing this exit of actually starting to talk with potential buyers, you need to have runway. This is not something you do when you're like, oh, we're out of cash, like let's sell this. You're gonna have absolutely no leverage and you're still gonna have legal bills to be able to do this. And so you wanna start early. Right now, I'm hearing that about 9 months is probably the minimum that you need. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, making sure that you have that documentation on your IP, knowing where you stand on that. But it's also interesting looking at, since the beginning of 2021, of 530 startup acquisitions, more than half of them were startups buying other startups. So people in your ecosystem are potential buyers. This is something kind of to be aware of, hey, you know what, we didn't position ourselves in the right way to go the way we want, but kind of looking within your ecosystem. A lot of people have been talking about kind of your network, and that's really, it's gonna be helpful in that. But there is a lot of tech deals have been showing that it is resilient for in the M&A market. At the end of 2022, it was the sector's second best year in both deal count and value. So there is activity there, and it's something to evaluate as we're going through this.
Sounds like 9 months is the magic number. 9 months of runway to consider M&A, 9 months of runway that you might need for the next seed and fundraise. That concludes our evening of panel discussions, but I wanted to open this up for everyone. If anybody, yes, please.
Quick question, Owen. You mentioned some. I have a question about maybe some red flags. If a VC is offering to do 2 tranches, is that, and also to put a board seat, to have a board seat, are those at all? I'm in the midst of this, so I'm wondering if you have anything to offer up.
The question was, is if a VC is offering 2 tranches, and
500 into 2 tranches.
okay, are they the lead VC?
Yes.
They are the lead. Take it. Everyone will offer money. Nobody says no. Nobody says no. So you want to take the money from a lead investor. They can be a family office, they can be an institutional venture capitalist, they can be an angel, they can be anybody. But you want to take it from the lead because the lead is going to set the price and the lead is going to do diligence on your company. Okay, I would accept it.
The structures, that's normal, to get a board seat and a couple of
Board
tranches.
seats.
Yeah.
It's expected. At least one, sometimes they ask for 2.
Did you question. Did you put up your hand when you didn't have when my colleague asked? Okay.
So we're in the process of setting up a board.
Okay. I've restructured boards several times, and you ideally have a board because every term sheet will say that they get a board seat or they get an observer seat. Everybody will say that. So, okay. It sounds like you have a high-class problem. It sounds like a high-class problem to me. You're welcome.
Yes.
Hi, so it sounds like you guys are all saying things at the end in life, which is always good advice, but how do you think this current climate is going to affect things like down rounds? So, because you get from your seat to your hopefully your seat, you need to think about like how early valuation works, early equity is going to affect, being to get money in the next 18 months. Perspectives on that, given this current climate?
It's going to put downward pressure on, it's the next round, and depending on what your prior round valuation is, you're not going to get as much as you used to for the round, so that can have its result. Your current investors are more likely to be supportive of a buoyant valuation because they're already committed to the company. So you might do better going to them first and seeing if they can bite, which is normally the right thing to do anyway. But yeah, no. Each round, you're talking to new investors. They're going to view it objectively, and it is what it is. And it's unfortunate, but it could be a flat or a down round for some companies.
I think it's important to understand also that things are cyclical, and the environment will change. And so as you're thinking about those down rounds, and I'm kind of, again, I'm more the debt guy, but I'm speaking about this because we see it in companies that we finance. Just know your runway, know what you have in your runway, and as you're projecting out those future rounds, just understanding your runway and what you have access to now, and it's going to contribute to who you're talking to and what you're talking to them about for down rounds,
Also,
regardless of the environment.
Also, try not to raise money in the summer or during the fall, winter holidays. It just puts more downward pressure on your success.
Would you agree pens were down 3 years ago this time, right? Or, in mid-March, right? The equity capital, the VC capital that was out there dried up, went away for a while, right? Because of what happened in the world. And that changed, right? It picked the pens back up sometime down the road. So the environment changes.
Did anybody have any other?
Just a suggestion, as a way to ameliorate that, you can sweeten the deal. So if you want to hang on to a higher valuation, you can do some kickers like offer warrants with investment or some other thing. So if you get a little creative, you might be able to get especially if you're hovering and you don't want to show down round's a bad signal. So if you're kind of hovering there, you may want to get a little creative. And warrants is typically what I see as a way to get creative with finance. Sorry.
Steven?
Nobody on the panel mentioned equity crowdfunding. Is that, I just want to get a little bit of feedback or opinion on that.
Could you repeat the question?
The question.
Equity crowdfunding. We didn't talk about that as an option for capital fundraising.
There's a legal piece to that, and then there's a strategy piece to that.
Yeah.
Legal piece.
But actually from the clients that I'm working with, kind of in the space of more enterprise SaaS, we don't see a lot of that activity. So I don't have anything to kind of add off the cuff, but good to research, kind of see if it's a good fit for you, kind of talking with an attorney who kind of has active experience in that, I would recommend.
I have a banking perspective on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from a lending perspective, we have financed and have seen many companies over the last, I would say even 10 years, that started raising capital through platforms like Kickstarter. And once they, got their product off the shelf, so to speak, and began to get it out in the market, they began picking up orders from, I'm talking about consumer products, things like that, right? But we have seen that, and I could give you examples of companies that started raising through Kickstarter, kind of graduated into non-bank alternative forms of financing to further support their growth, and then eventually graduated away from companies like us and into traditional bank financing. So that's certainly an option. Again, there's things to consider, but we have seen success stories from those types of funding vehicles.
I have 2 companies in my portfolio that have done it. And one recently raised $600,000, so I think that's a pretty good success. It's work. The thing that I learned about it is part of the reason you succeed is you bring investors. You have to do the marketing, and that gets you to the top of the pile. There's a search thing going on in the bigger ones, and or gets you recommended. They give you special treatment. So you have to put effort into it. You have to put some money into it. You got to make videos and some other stuff. So there's a lot of how-tos to learn about it. There are people that you can hire to do some of the creative work for you. I think it's worth seriously considering if you have a product that seems like it'd be a good fit for crowdfunding. Personally, I don't understand it, how people would invest because they're not able to do the kind of diligence. And so you got a lot of small investors, and God bless them, I hope they do well, but
It's higher risk, for sure,
it's
right?
extraordinarily high risk, but it seems to be working. So I would try, to figure out whether your company is the kind of company, consumer products companies do well, but because the average person can understand it. If you're doing something really sophisticated, it might not be great.
I wanted to ask, how many people here, by show of hands, are business to business? Business to business. Okay, and everyone else is business to consumer? By show of hands? Business to consumer? Okay, but somebody doesn't have hands. Okay, I think crowdfunding is ideal for business to consumer. I haven't seen it myself for business to business.
Let's clarify, the question was for equity crowdfunding.
Yes.
Which is far different than something like Kickstarter.
Yeah, I was talking about equity. I think it's viable. I mean, to my surprise, it seems to be potentially viable. You can't run simultaneously fundraising, though. I wouldn't be doing that at the same time you're doing the traditional funding round. That's confusing, and your investors are going to get all tangled up, and terms will be different. And so I would sequence your funding. It's a good place to start.
Go ahead.
Could cooperatives be used as a way of raising funds through membership? Would that be a way of crowdfunding through cooperatives, whether it's agricultural cooperative or cooperative, have member classes?
I don't like hard.
Only if it's your business model. I mean, I wouldn't do
Yeah,
that.
if
If that's a business model that you
Yes.
have, yeah, that comes with that business model. So,
Okay, so
sure.
I'm keen to talk to employees. I was trying to say to you, go to employees. Angels are spending their own money, employees are spending other people's money. And so employees, what are they? Mainly family offices and institutional venture capital. And PEs are maybe employees, but we're not talking about PE here. IVCs and family offices are employees. That's key, because these people are paid to invest. Okay, they want to invest, but you've got to get in front of them. So there's 2 pitch decks. Your teaser deck might be 5 slides, and your main deck you're going to present with is maybe 12 or 15 slides. Don't do 50. Whatever you do, don't do 50 slides. You're going to speak for 12, 15 minutes on your deck, and if you after that, good. If you're presenting to institutional venture capital, after that, it's going to be one-to-one. But your teaser deck, 5 slides, and your deck that you present with, 12 to 15 slides. Don't do any more than that.
I think that's pretty much it for the evening. Please stay because we are going to have more networking here for the evening. Thank you so much to the panelists for your time and your knowledge.
All right. Well done.
Great job.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Definitely, I'll,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Alan,